Hey, I am Mustafa Sharif. Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I'm looking forward this episode gonna be super interesting. We're gonna talk about biking culture and smart cities. I have the pleasure to welcome Chris to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
How are you?
Doing very well. Yes, thank you. Lots changing around us in the world, and some bad stuff and some good stuff. But obviously, we're here in Delft, seeing a light at the end of the tunnel
Yeah.
to this Corona situation.
How is it to work from home? Is it easy? Did you manage?
Yeah, prior to starting work at the Dutch Cycling Embassy, I had worked from home for 4 or 5 years, so I was kind of used to the concept. But at that time, the kids were obviously going to school, and in this situation, we've got an 11 and a 13-year-old schooling from home, and that makes it quite difficult. They've got checking in with their teachers on a regular basis, have structured classes, but only takes them so far through the day, and they do need a little bit of supervision and assistance, and so that sometimes pulls us away from stuff we're working on. But so far so good, and yeah, one the youngest started back 2 days a week this week, and we're looking forward to the oldest who starts up again on June 1st.
Great, good news.
Yeah, exactly.
And are you going back to the office as well soon?
Yeah, the public transportation system goes back to regular schedule June 1st, and our office is located about 70 kilometers away in Utrecht, so it's about a 45-minute train ride from here. The concern is capacity, so it's only going to be running at about 40% capacity. They haven't quite figured out how they're going to manage that, whether it'll be an online reservation system or. And once we learn that, then I'll be able to commit to going into the office at least 1 or 2 days a week to start, and then hopefully as capacity increases and things ramps up, I'll be back in full swing again.
Yes, that sounds very promising. And again, thank you so much for giving your time for the podcast.
Not a problem. Always happy to talk about building better cities and how the cycling can help enable that.
Yes. Well, Chris, you're gonna be the storyteller of this episode. So far, there are 5,500 listening to you and from 71 countries. And so, greetings from Stockholm to you. And please tell us about yourself and what are you passionate about?
Yeah, where to start? I mean, I currently work for the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We're a public-private partnership started by the national government here in the Netherlands, located in Utrecht. I myself live with my family in Delft, but I am not Dutch. I am a Canadian who grew up in the Toronto area, spent the past 10 or 12 years in Vancouver, and we packed up and moved to the Netherlands about a year ago for this kind of dream job situation that I'm currently working in, and it grew out of the activism work that my partner Melissa and I were doing, kind of on our evenings and weekends, in trying to influence the cycling culture in Vancouver. It brought us to the Netherlands to write a series of blog posts that kind of snowballed into a book that was published by Island Press at the end of 2018. It's called Building the Cycling City, the Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality. And that kind of inadvertently transformed Melissa and I into international ambassadors for the Netherlands as a couple of Canadians, which was quite strange. But we were lucky enough to travel the world with this book and teach cities what's so great about the cycling culture here in the Netherlands, how it can help them become better places to live, work, and play, and give them examples of other cities, perhaps more car-dominated cities, that have recently started along their journey towards becoming cycling cities, like our hometown of Vancouver, like New York City, like Austin, Texas, that received inspiration and guidance from the Dutch, and are implementing some of the lessons and the concepts that we talk about in the book.
Yeah, what a great story. And I would love that we dig deep in each chapter of it. So, what made you be a biking activist? Can we call you like this?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to bristle at that word activist. I mean, at the time, Melissa and I are not trained engineers, transport planners, or anything of the like. We were just people that were cycling around Vancouver at the time. The mayor was implementing really positive changes to the streets, great cycle lanes, traffic calmed, bikeways, and we were experiencing our own challenges and our own joys, and trying to communicate that over social media. And that evolved into writing a series of blog posts and creating a series of films. But it was all about looking at the city from the user perspective rather than the kind of top-down planner engineer perspective, and how these systems and concepts can be implemented to improve people's quality of life.
Yes. And today I would love that you inspire us with your magic about how do we change the mindset so we got this into this biking culture. So we can start from Netherlands. Who is biking in Netherlands? Only adults, or you can even see kids?
Yeah, it's not hyperbole to say that virtually everyone cycles in the Netherlands, and it's I think one of the things that people notice when they first visit here is it's not just the fit, the brave, the young and the middle aged. It is the elderly. People who cycle here into their 80s and 90s. People with physical disabilities cycle. People with children cycle. The children themselves are on a bike at 4 or 5 years of age, and there really is the rich cycle, the poor cycle. I mean, it's really an egalitarian mode of transport that everybody has access to, and something like 84% of the country cycles at least once a week. So it's really kind of been a culture that's been created over decades of investment in their streets, and a very careful selection of priorities, shall we say, to not put car traffic at the top of the transportation hierarchy, but actually at the bottom. And a lot of cities and regions and countries talk about that concept, but very few actually implement it and make those difficult decisions. And the Netherlands was luckily one of those countries that did about 50 years ago, when the rest of the world was headed in a very different direction.
So you mean this culture was created by the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, it never really went away, to be fair. I think, and places around the world had a cycling culture up until the Second World War. If you look at photos of most American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand cities, most European cities, people were cycling in mass numbers until around the late 1950s, early 1960s, when the engineers and the economists kind of hijacked the transportation planning profession and made the case that the economic prosperity and the modernization of cities relied solely on the free access and reign of the motor vehicle. And as a result, people abandoned their bikes and hopped into their cars because that's the way their streets and their cities were being designed. And they lost generations to the automobile. There's no doubt that the Dutch cycling numbers dropped off a little bit, but they recovered, or they declined less rapidly than other places around the world, and bounced back much quickly. So they didn't lose those generations of people cycling, and it was passed down from father to daughter, from grandparent to grandchild. And as a result, cycling here is not seen as a lifestyle or a political statement or anything. It's just, as we like to call it, walking with wheels. It's the bikes here are really rusty and old and under maintained, and they're not painted or considered part of a person's personality. They just ride these plain black utilitarian bicycles to wherever they're going and use the bike as a tool to kind of walk around their city with a slightly faster pace and a more efficient machine that helps them along the way.
Yeah. So basically, cycling is a part of the daily life. It's not something special. Oh, today I'm going to bike.
No, exactly. But it's a choice that people make as a result of the way their streets and cities are designed. This is not the Dutch don't care about the environment or are more morally superior to the rest of the world. These are choices that the engineers, planners, politicians made to make the bicycle the first choice and the easiest choice. And to make driving, a little bit of a difficult choice because it's expensive and you have to go kind of these circuitous routes around the city. Whereas the bicycle is made the more direct and convenient and comfortable mode of transport.
Yeah. And do people bike only, let's say, from A to B, like from home to their work, or they use it in other for other activities as well?
Yeah, I think the trip to work is probably one that not a great number of Dutch people make because they do statistically work a significant distance from their office. So in that case, a lot of Dutch people will drive or take public transportation, but it is really the everyday trips that you see people out on bikes for. So they're going to the market in the city center, they're going to their hairdressers, their doctor's office, picking their kids up from school, going to a friend's house, going to a restaurant or cafe. Virtually everything is done on a bike here, and as a result, the bikes are kind of kitted out with these extra racks and crates and pannier bags to haul modest amounts of freight. So a couple bags of groceries that'll get you through the next couple days. Basket, a bouquet of flowers, whatever you happen to need for the day, and it's really something that to see the way that the bicycle is ingrained in their everyday life, and they don't think anything about maybe going to the hardware store and getting some long pieces of wood and then cycling with them under their arm. I mean, we're continually blown away by the things we see people carrying by bike here. They
So,
just
so
don't
this
think.
this is something I'm super interested in. So, do people carry furniture from IKEA to by bike?
Yeah, maybe not entire pieces of furniture. There are larger freight bicycles, cargo bikes that you could carry a couple of flat packs on. I mean, if anything, it's a pragmatic decision. You can easily go to IKEA and get your furniture delivered, bring home a couple of photo frames, or potted plants, or whatever's practical.
Yeah.
But having said that, we have seen people moving entire sofas on by bicycle, and but they're certainly the exception and not the norm.
Yes, yes. And also part of this culture started the Dutch Cycling Embassy. Tell me more about the story. How did it start and why?
Yeah, so I think the Dutch Cycling Embassy was formed in 2009, 11, sorry. So it's just coming up on its 9-year anniversary. And it was basically formed by the national government here, who were getting all kinds of requests from international governments, embassies, and consulates around the world that were looking for expertise and advice from the Netherlands on cycling. And they were kind of tired of handling those requests themselves. So they set up this separate organization that could answer the inquiries, deal with incoming delegations who wanted to come to the Netherlands to study the infrastructure, the culture, the techniques here, and also to export this knowledge and expertise, these decades of street experiments, trial and error, best practice that's been developed by designing around the bicycle for so long. And so we get part of our funding from the national government. The rest is financed by our individual members. So we have about 70 organizations right now that are kind of paid participants at the Dutch Cycling Embassy. They pay an annual fee to call themselves a member.
Yeah.
And they are anything from private consultants, transport engineers, planners, um, academic institutions. So we have a number of universities that do a lot of research around cycling, municipal governments that obviously are day to day in the trenches, building the infrastructure, the intersections, and want to just help other cities with their own challenges and opportunities.
Can different partners, I mean, are you open to international partnership?
Yeah, so we that's how we get out there and get into these markets, and is partnering usually with municipal governments. Sometimes it's state or federal governments, sometimes it's embassies, sometimes it's private companies that just want to engage with our experts and learn what is best practice for the challenges that they're experiencing in their context and in their city. So if they're having trouble with intersection design or the public transport combination or any of these specific concepts, we can put together a team of experts drawing from both public and private organizations, and then come to that city or town and hold what we call a think bike workshop, where we're looking at the specific corridors and intersections and challenges that that city is facing, and we can shine a light on maybe a fresh perspective on how the Dutch would approach that particular challenge. And through that process, we're imparting all of this institutional knowledge that exists, because, like I said, the Dutch have figured out through trial and error over decades what's the best placement for a traffic light. What height should it be at? What's the phasing that should be at? What does the curb cut detail look like? All these little things that cities are now struggling with as they start to implement cycling infrastructure. They don't need to go through all these mistakes and make them themselves. The Dutch have figured out best practice for a lot of the stuff, and we're more than willing to come along and help them out.
Yeah, so basically you just come and say, okay, this is it. This is what you can do.
Yeah,
Instead
but
of
it's
instead of going through, like, let's say 30 or 20 years of try and fail.
exactly, but it's not always as simple as copying and pasting. It's more giving them guidance and then adapting the solution for their specific context. Because there are places in the world that are very different from the Netherlands, whether it's climate, geography, land use, all these different factors. They have to adopt a solution, and as I said earlier, it's not necessarily just cycling that's the tool that's going to get the best result. Maybe sometimes it's combining cycling with public transport. Maybe it's electric bikes. Maybe it's other solutions that the Dutch have implemented in varying contexts. Because every Dutch city is different, and there isn't a one size fits all solution.
Yes. And if I might ask you, what are the key elements that make biking culture so successful in Netherlands? We talked a bit about the physical urban planning.
Yeah, it's really kind of the top down approach. So they take network design very, very seriously. And I think if anyone comes to us, that's one of the first topics we start is you need to plan your network, and not just start building bike lanes on random streets. So they take a holistic approach and make sure that cycling is made direct, it's made attractive, it's made that it connects all of the possible destinations and departure points for a given city. So it checks the boxes for the trip to school, for the trip to work, for the trip to the shops, and so on and so forth. Because people on bikes will take distance trips of different distance, different lengths, different speeds, different types. And all those need to be taken into consideration when it comes to the design of the network. At the same time, the car network is just as important as the bicycle network, and this is another thing that we tend to emphasize is almost every Dutch city has a very specific car traffic circulation plan where there's a hierarchy of streets, 30-kilometer-hour streets, 50-kilometer-hour streets, and all of the 30-kilometer-hour streets push the traffic to the outskirts of the city very quickly and directly, so that you don't have cars cutting through your city at high speeds. And that creates these conditions where cycling can thrive on virtually every street and not just the ones that are designated bikeways. So it's through designing these mobility systems, the bike network, the cycle network, and the public transport network, as three separate but connected forms of mobility, that I think the Dutch have really achieved some phenomenal success. And the mode share definitely proved that. I think 1 in 4 trips in the country are made by bicycle, and the 25% is foot or public transport, and then about half of the trips here are made by car, and that's really unparalleled anywhere else in the world.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear. Here in Scandinavia, we have Copenhagen as a great city for biking. So do you have any statistic that shows which is the best country, not country, city when it comes to biking? I mean, top three.
Yeah, I think if you ask the Danes, they'll say Denmark, and if you ask the Dutch,
Exactly.
they say. But I mean, one point we always make is that Copenhagen is one city in a fairly car-dominated country, and the Netherlands is one country in the world that has built cycling cities virtually everywhere. The One of the stats that we pulled out for the book we wrote was that there are 202 villages, cities, and towns in the Netherlands where the bicycle mode share exceeds the car mode share for trips under 7.5 kilometers. So it's tiny villages of 1,000 or 100 people. It's mid-sized cities of 60, 70,000, and then it's obviously in the capitals and the metropolitan areas like Rotterdam and Amsterdam. So they've made cycling work in a variety of contexts and scales and cultures, and I think that's worth celebrating because, as you said, it's not just a matter of one size fits all, copy paste what we did here. It's taking all of those a toolbox of solutions and then applying them where it works for your city.
Yeah, I would love to hear your reflection about because in some countries, biking is for poor people, cars for the rich people. So, what do you think about this mindset?
It's unfortunate, and it's not something that's going to change very quickly. The car industry is such that they've have the resources to spend billions, if not trillions, on selling this lifestyle of unlimited mobility and freedom, and I think people who end up buying into that lifestyle find out very quickly that it's not all it's cracked up to be in terms of the additional costs, the danger, um, the stress involved, and ultimately the impact that car has on the city around it. And I think we're just beginning to understand in terms of air pollution, noise pollution, the impact on our social connection in our neighborhoods, the all these externalities that the car brings. So our challenge as cycling activists or advocates is to make the case that the bicycle is a lifestyle that's worth pursuing. That it's not an instrument of poverty or something that demonstrates that you are of lesser means, but it's something perhaps that you are proud to ride, that you're consciously choosing the bicycle because you want the freedom, the unlimited mobility without the additional stress and cost and that come around the automobile. So it's not necessarily maybe making it about cars versus bikes because again, there's all these other modes of transport that we should be encouraging. But at the same time, like I said, our challenge is now um, making people choose cycling as perhaps a lifestyle choice. But ultimately, it comes down to how their streets look because they're not going to cycle with 6 lanes of traffic. They're not going to cycle if there's no place to park their bike at the end of their trip. Cities and governments need to take the lead and make that cycling choice as practical and as attractive as possible. And I think a lot of people who maybe grew up on a bicycle and remember the freedom that it brought them at such a young age and can rediscover that feeling if the conditions are made suitable in their city.
Yeah. So basically, what you tell is the responsibility, government should take the responsibility.
They have
It,
to, yeah. They are the ones that have built their cities around the automobile, and they are the ones that are going to undo that damage. That's not to say that advocates and activists can't play a role. We would certainly encourage anyone who's passionate about making their city a better place to connect with like-minded people in their city, organizations that are pushing for change, and to support the politicians that are trying to make those changes. Because, as you can probably attest, it doesn't come without controversy and outrage and backlash from the car lobby, who see this as a zero-sum game. That when space is being taken away from the car, that they're ultimately the ones losing. But that's another story we need to tell. At the end of the day, for every short trip that's being made by foot or bicycle, it's one less car in front of the people that want and need to drive. And the fact that the Netherlands is also not just a great place to cycle, but also a great place to drive. Another study we pulled out for the book was that Waze, the driving app, named the Netherlands the best place, the most satisfying place in the world to drive a car for 3 consecutive years, 2015, 16, and 17, specifically referencing its smooth traffic conditions because, again, the car is a choice that people have. But when they have other options, they're perhaps more likely to choose them for shorter trips, and that frees up precious space, road space for people who want to drive and people who need to drive.
Tell me more about the book, Building the Cycling City. What stories are you bringing up?
Yeah. So the original intention when we approached Island Press was to tell the story of five cities in the Netherlands that had changed direction and gone from fairly car dominated places to true cycling cities, and they were um, Amsterdam, Utrecht, Groningen, Eindhoven, and Rotterdam. And Rotterdam, I think, is a particularly compelling case study because it was completely leveled by the German bombs during the Second World War and rebuilt after that around the car. So it has these broad, wide thoroughfares, these tall buildings, this separated land use patterns that separate commerce from residential from business, and so it feels very much like a an American city. At the time, they referred to it as the Chicago on the Mass River, the planners, and like most Dutch cities in the 70s, it faced multiple crises. The big ones being the OPEC oil crisis, where fuel was being rationed, and they had a series of car-free Sundays that opened up the streets to people. And they had a road safety crisis that was killing thousands of people and hundreds of children each and every year. And as a result of those two crises, most cities across the Netherlands changed their direction and started building more space for walking, cycling, and public transport. Um, so the intention was to tell those stories of how those historical events happened. But Island Press came back to us and challenged us. Okay, that's fine, but you have to make it relevant to 21st century cities and show how those lessons, those examples, those concepts are being applied in other places. And so we pursued storylines in, like I said, our hometown of Vancouver, but unlikely places like Austin, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia, where that have learned ideas from the Dutch. Some of them have even engaged with the Dutch Cycling Embassy on their walking and cycling master plans, but are starting to build out these networks, and they're in very early stages. But there's examples, and I think push back a bit on this idea that the Netherlands is its own unique ecosystem, and no one can learn anything from it, and nobody can copy what they've done because. But we've in the book outlined 10 cities that are doing exactly that, and they're, like I said, they're earlier in their journey, but they're well on their way now to building out pretty robust walking and cycling networks.
Yeah, super interesting book. Is it available in different languages or just in English?
Unfortunately, not. Yeah, we worked with Island Press to try and get some foreign translations, but unfortunately, it involves a another publisher, like a third party publisher, stepping up and fronting the or licensing the translation rights and publishing and then distributing the book in their own country. And we've had some initial interest from various countries, but none have actually come through. So if anyone listening wants to translate and distribute this book in their own language, I would certainly invite them to get in touch.
Amazing. Chris, smart city. So tell me, how do you define a smart city?
Yeah, it's I think a hot topic these days, and I'm going to be a bit counterintuitive, I think, and not talk about technology because I think too often the focus is on how technology can make our cities better, and I don't want to dismiss it outright because there are certainly technologies that can. But I fear and I worry that in the name of progress, in the name of the next shiny object, the Hyperloop, the whatever autonomous, connected, self-driving, flying vehicle, that we are ultimately going to lose sight of what's important, and that's giving places in our cities for children to roam freely, for neighbors to interact with each other, for people to walk into the city center and to experience their city at a human scale. spend money at a local business, sit and have a drink or a meal on the terrace. These are all things that Dutch people enjoy on a daily basis, but it's all a result of keeping the car and the technology at arm's length and resisting this urge to uh, continually modernize and improve ourselves. And I actually read an article recently from Silicon Valley that referred to the retro bicycle coming back as a result of Corona crisis. And I think that ultimately really sums up the attitude of Silicon Valley and other entrepreneurs and innovators and unfortunately some politicians, that the bicycle is this 125-year-old technology that people have moved past and forgotten about and aren't interested in revisiting. The same could be said for the tram as well, and
Yeah.
we know what light rail can accomplish nowadays in the 21st century. But these are being forgotten for the pursuit of self-driving shuttles and buses and ride-hailing and all these new-fangled things that are ultimately, I think, going to make our city more congested, more um, exclusive, less accessible to people of less economic means, less equitable, honestly. And so a smart city is maybe something that resists the common practice that this idea that cars equal economic vitality, and look at other ways at bringing more of a human touch to their cities. And I could speak at length about the children aspect to it. And one of the great tweets on this topic was by my friend and colleague Leo Steinberg, who said that a smart city is not one, or is one where a child can roam freely, independently, one that has the facilities to enable that. And this has been one of the amazing things about moving to Delft is our 11 and 13-year-old children are suddenly out there on their own, cycling to school, cycling to the shop, cycling to friends' houses, cycling to the swimming pool. And they enjoy this new autonomy and freedom and independence that I think every children should have, but we've unfortunately designed it out of our cities as a result of trying to make them smart, if you will. So,
Yeah,
uh,
you know what, Chris? This is a completely different answer from what I get in the previous 65 episodes about smart cities. So it's very interesting, and thank you so much for sharing this point of view about what is a smart city.
my pleasure. I don't want to be one of those kind of those people talking about
Activists.
the good old days, but really, I think our cities would do ourselves a lot of favors if we look back and revisited some of those older technologies rather than looking ahead and at the next shiny object that promises to transform our streets or whatever.
Yeah. What do you think about, because recently, I guess you also in Netherlands have this electrical scooters, or what do you call them?
Yeah, they're electric kick scooters, they call them.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Do you think it's something promising and we keep going to take it?
It's interesting. They're actually illegal here in the Netherlands. So they've been the national
Oh,
government not knowing how to regulate them and not wanting to further congest the cycle paths has just put a outright ban on their sale and usage. Um, but having said that, I think again the Netherlands may be a bit of a different situation. There are other places, more car-dominated contexts like Los Angeles, like Berlin, that are embracing these scooters. And as far as I'm concerned, if they're replacing car trips with something a bit more, a bit slower, a bit more scale appropriate, that doesn't if somebody's going to choose this instead of a Uber or Lyft or a taxi or their own car, then that's certainly a win. I think the challenge has really been on providing parking facilities for these scooters because cities are quite hesitant to reallocate car parking space away from private cars on the streets. The scooters themselves are cluttering up the footpaths and the public spaces, and that's the challenge. So I think some cities, Washington D.C., I saw recently, have tried to create these kind of parklet on-street facilities where they remove one car parking space per 100 meters or whatever it is to allow for scooter and dockless bike parking And that's certainly one situation that or one scenario that where there's a solution. But I'm not you know dogmatic when it comes to the bicycle. If people want to ride scooters, if people want to ride whatever mode of transport that works for them, but ultimately that choice needs to be made easier by the city officials.
Yes. Interesting, because here in Stockholm we are actually doing almost the same, that we are taking off one car parking and give it to the scooters, and also we are providing with the charging stations. But still you can see them like all around the city, in a kind of messy way, like just thrown down. So yeah, it's interesting if this is going to be the future of mobility or short distance mobility. Well, Chris, I'm so happy to talk to you. I'm so inspired. So, again, thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your experience and knowledge with us.
No, it was my pleasure. Always happy to chat.
And now, so how would you like to summarize what we talked about in three takeaway messages to people listening to you and to Urbanistica podcast?
Yeah, so this I think comes back to the book that I'm currently writing with my partner Melissa. We're writing a follow-up to Building the Cycling City, and it's loosely going to be titled something around the low car city. So I think we should see cycling as not as an ends to but as a mean, a tool to build the end goal, which is cities for social connection, for this um, place where children can grow up, where the elderly can move around freely, where people can hear and experience their city with all of their senses. And so cycling, obviously, here in the Netherlands works because it's the way the culture is orientated, and but it shouldn't be seen as the end goal. And if public transport works best for your city, if kick scooters work for your city, you shouldn't lose sight on what you're trying to achieve, and that's not just more people cycling. It's fewer cars on your street, and more human, more socially connected streets. So um, the bicycle is not the be all and end all, but it should be seen as a tool that your city can implement really rapid and radical change. That comes to the current situation that we find ourselves in with the corona crisis. And I think you're seeing cities around the world adapting their streets very quickly and at an unprecedented level, because they're seeing that the only way they can keep their streets moving is by getting people out of their cars. With the diminished public transport capacity, they're going to have to fill that gap with active transportation. And so maybe like the oil crisis was in the 1970s for the Netherlands, this can be a tipping point for the entire world as cities start re-envisioning their streets and seeing them as more than just places to move automobiles. So that would be the kind of optimistic message that I would leave your listeners with, and hopefully we can now make our cities better for people rather than for the past 50 years we've been making them pretty great for cars.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for the powerful takeaway messages.
My pleasure.
So, three hashtags for the episode.
Yeah. Well, I would say, hashtag low car city, hashtag cycling city. I mean, the two are interconnected. And the other one I would use, and this is a topic we wrote about in chapter 5 of the book, is hashtag demand more. And that city officials are headed the right direction, but the citizens, the activists, the organizations that want to see change in their city need to demand more from their elected officials.
Yes. Thank you so much again for giving your time to Urbanistica podcast. I'm happy
Oh,
to chat with you.
thanks for having me, Mustafa.
And thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. Please follow Instagram and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you have any great story that make our city smarter, please contact me. I am Mustafa Sharif. Have a good life.